Kia ora Aotearoa and welcome to the third and final Auckland Central frontrunners debate on Citizen A between current Auckland Central MP, Nationals Nikki Kaye, and Labour Party list MP Jacinda Ardern. Welcome to you both and thank you for joining us. Over the first two debates, we have asked both these MPs who is best for Auckland Central, which party is best for Greater Auckland. Tonight, we expand the debate to the nationwide election. Who is best for New Zealand, National or Labour, in terms of the economy, the environment and foreign affairs? Let's kick things off this evening with the economy. We face the worst economic conditions since the Great Depression, an $18 billion deficit, 2 credit downgrades and 1 in 5 young people are unemployed. From 2008, Treasury claimed we would get 1.5% growth, 2.3% growth and then 3.2% growth. We actually got negative 1.1% growth, negative 0.4% growth and negative 0.1% growth. Nikki, why should we believe Treasury that the government can get back into surplus by 2015 when they have been out by as much as 3.1% of GDP in their growth estimates?
Well, it's not just Treasury. There are many other economic analysts who have been commenting. Who have been commenting on the preview, for instance, the other day. And what the preview shows is that we're going to be in surplus by 2015. It also says that possibility about 2.6% growth. And one of the things that has been made very clear from the preview is that we have had a very difficult time due to the Canterbury earthquakes. But we're on track to be in surplus and we're very proud of that because we've got a balanced economic plan that includes, we've obviously made $4 billion reduction in expenditure over the last 3 years, which is prudent in these times. And I think that's in comparison to Labour, who have promised more spending and more borrowing.
Do you think the financial crisis is beyond the paradigm of Treasury's ideological position?
No, I don't. I think, look, Treasury have a long history of serving this country well, I think, actually. Yes, their predictions are sometimes going to be out.
Well,
and
3.1% of GDP.
Well, I think we have to understand that we've had some very devastating events happen in this country. And something like the Canterbury earthquake has actually been revised several times. But we're quite confident that I think the upper limit is 30 billion that it will cost the country, but we're very confident, and I think Bill said the other day, that unless there was some extraordinary significant event,
and there are a couple of those on the cards,
and he said, look, there's a 1 in 20 chance that these figures will be significantly out and we won't be in surplus. So we're very confident. We've got 170,000 jobs that will be created over the next 3 years.
You've actually revised that down to 150.
Well, Jacinda, the government can argue that they didn't start the global financial crisis and have done the best they can with the hand that they've been dealt. Isn't it really Labour's fault, this is what they would say, for growing government expenditure beyond what we could afford in times as bad as these?
Yeah, look, I think on that measure, we just need to look at the record. Under Labour, we had the strongest continuous economic growth since World War II and continuous budget surpluses. We demonstrated that we were fiscally prudent. Now, that has come through in Standard & Poor's analysis of the way both National and Labour have managed the economy. But it is fair to look at where New Zealand is compared to other OECD nations. Okay. Now, which other OECD nations have had a credit downgrade like we have? The USA, Ireland, places like Italy, places that really are tanking economically, and we are right there amongst them. It's not fair to say that we're experiencing a global financial crisis and that's the reason we're doing badly. We are doing badly because the government has not had a plan, and the reason they're predicting we'll come back into surplus in 2014 is because, Bomber, they're going to sell off our assets to get there.
Bomber, let me just finish. I just want to respond to a couple of things. We've had growth in 8 out of the last 9 quarters. We've had the most devastating earthquakes in Canterbury. We can't find a single event across the developed world whereby it's hit a country's GDP more than these Canterbury earthquakes have. And can I just make a couple of other points? Whilst Labour may have kept public debt low, when we had our first caucus, we were facing a decade of deficits because of massive spending tracks and massive spending commitments like the electrification of rail that was unfunded.
Borrowing for tax cuts though, that's cost us $1.1 billion.
Well, look, let me make 2 points about that. Firstly, we've had a really difficult situation in this country whereby we've had a number of vulnerable people, and 2/3 of our tax cuts have gone to the bottom two tax brackets. And in my view, given that there have been some rises in terms of the cost of living, that's actually helped many families.
Well, let's talk about that. Let's talk about that. The Child Poverty Action Group last month specifically cited your government's welfare policies as, and I quote, a huge tragedy for those in poverty. Food parcel handouts have doubled, while state food grants have decreased, and John Key only last week admitted those living in poverty have increased. Is National only concerned with the wealthy?
Absolutely not. And I just want to make a couple of points about this. Firstly, under Labor, power prices rose 72% in 9 years. Food prices rose 21%
we all had
in
money
9 years.
during those years. That wasn't such a problem.
Let me finish, Bomber. We actually saw food prices drop last month. But let me also say, we have significantly invested. We have insulated over 100,000 houses with the Green Party. We've put 50 million into social housing. We've upgraded thousands of state houses which were left in, and many people were left in very vulnerable conditions in state housing.
But food parcels have doubled, handouts have doubled.
Well, I think the point is, Bomber, we've had a very massive global financial crisis, but given what we've been handed, we have made significant investment, including 50 million in first-time mums.
Bomber,
You'd like to respond?
Yeah, I do. I think I need to respond to that because Standard & Poor's, when they downgraded us, made 3 points when they said this is the reason New Zealand is in the situation it is. One was debt. Now, we can't discount the fact that some of this was just about choices that the government made. They chose to give 40% of the amount they spent on tax cuts to 10% of the population.
Well, they're doing it hard. Rich people are doing it hard.
We had to borrow to do that. But that wasn't the only thing that they mentioned. The second issue was our incredible level of private debt. We are not saving enough, and the government doesn't have a plan on that front. And the third area was that we're really vulnerable because we rely so much on dairy commodities. We're not doing enough to support our exporters.
Well, let's talk about. Hold on. Let's talk about Labor's record. Let's talk about Labor's record. By refusing to reverse the Ruth Richardson benefit cuts from the mother of all budgets, Labor doomed many beneficiaries to a decade of poverty while handing out middle-class welfare in the form of working for families. Is Labor too politically weak to tackle poverty for fear of being labelled soft on beneficiaries?
No, I think that this is an issue that, as a country, we have to front up and say, look, you know, most of the children now who are growing up in poverty, are living in the homes of beneficiaries. We've got to be honest about that.
And a decade of nothing.
Our first move was to bring in Working for Families, which lifted an incredible number of children out of poverty. We have the working poor, absolutely. But now the working poor are worse off again as the gap between rich and poor and incomes and costs are rising. But we've been very open. We left some unfinished business. Now we've got 2 things which we've already released that we think will make a difference. One is the $5,000 tax-free zone. That affects everyone, no matter whether or not you're earning or not. And also, this shouldn't be underestimated. Public health research has shown us that it takes almost 50% of a beneficiary's take to put fresh fruit and vegetables on the table of their family. Let's remove GST off that.
But these are the kinds of things we need to do. Hold on. Question to both of you. Let's get into the wider policies both your parties are putting forward. How does privatising our assets during such global financial uncertainty, which we've used as the reason why we haven't been succeeding, how does that benefit the New Zealand economy? First of you and then Jacinda.
Well, firstly, I want to make a couple of points to respond to Jacinda. The first thing is Labor do not have an economic plan that is fully costed, in my view, and also it involves borrowing and spending more. So it's not good enough for Jacinda to turn up and say that National has a bad record on the economy when her plans, by their own numbers, involve borrowing more and would leave New Zealand in a worse financial situation. What we've said in terms of the partial asset
privatisation,
partial asset sale, is that we need to ensure that we reduce our debt significantly. We know it will free up about $5 to $7 billion in terms of money so that we can actually spend that and invest that in other infrastructure. We've been very clear, 51% Crown ownership. We will cap investment at 10%. And what it will do is it will enable, there are so many New Zealanders that don't have places to invest their money. And Jacinda has talked today about the fact that there are many New Zealanders that have high levels of private debt. And one thing we've got to do is not only ensure they save more, and our KiwiSaver enrolment scheme is about that, but also we have to ensure that they have places to invest. And at the moment, New Zealanders are investing via their KiwiSaver accounts in mining companies in Australia, and we want to enable them to have places to invest. And Jacinda's also talked about
overseas investors, if they did purchase those, would see more money going offshore. How's that going to keep the money here?
Well, look, what we've said is there are over 100 billion at the moment that Kiwis invest in other places in New Zealand, and we're confident that via our KiwiSaver accounts, we've also got the government super fund, that New Zealanders are going to be given first preference to get those shares, and we're confident they'll take up the opportunity, because there is a lot of money that's going to be floating around via KiwiSaver and the government super fund to enable New Zealanders to invest in our own
government
country.
super fund has been suspended for a decade. I want to make that clear.
If the overseas investors buy up all of our assets, surely this money is just going to be going offshore.
Yeah,
surely doesn't that exacerbate the problem?
Absolutely. And let me just make one really clear point. I am really tired of this rhetoric, which is unfounded, that Labor has not fully costed its plan. We have costed our plan independently using Burl, robust economic analysis, because Labor has always been fiscally prudent and economically responsible. We have the record that proves
Well, let's talk about that. Second question.
So, second, to answer your question about asset sales, this is a short-term solution that doesn't fix a long-term problem. What Labor has said is we're going to make the hard decision. We will introduce a capital gains tax at 15% on capital other than, for instance, the first home. That will bring in enough revenue over 15 years, 25 billion worth. It broadens our tax base, it re-gears the economy, and it gets us out of the red at the same time as National's short-term plan to hock off your assets and my assets and the next generation.
Let's ask a question about that plan. I'll put it to you, Nikki. How does adding a capital gains tax and raising the minimum wage in a struggling New Zealand economy benefit our economy?
Let me make 2 points. Firstly, National's economic plan, is to continue to invest in infrastructure. That's billions of dollars in broadband and public transport, like the electrification of rail, and in our schools. 300 million we've spent in terms of investing in our classrooms. And this electorate alone, my schools were absolutely struggling, and we're investing in that infrastructure. We have also reformed our tax system, and we've reduced significantly regulation. You compare that to Labor's plan. Labor's plan is to go back to the 70s in terms of employment law. I've been inundated with small businesses who are saying that if their employment law package came in, they would significantly struggle. They would not be able to employ people. Many would go under. But then secondly, in terms of their capital gains tax policy, not only would it bring in 6 different tax rates, it's a death tax for many young New Zealanders who will inherit their house from their parents. What Labor's saying is that they're going to take 15% of the equity off them. There's a whole lot of unanswered questions. The exemption that's riddled with
send you our policy.
Because I don't think you've read it.
I'm going to send you our policy because you're misrepresenting it.
I want to make this point.
I want
to make this point about the capital gains tax. It is irresponsible to go into an election where most of the policy issues around the capital gains tax are going to be sent to an expert working group. That is appalling.
Okay. Doesn't seem to have much of a grasp of your capital gains tax. But what about the minimum wage? Surely there are a lot of a lot of businesses out there saying, "Hey, we can't afford this." How are you going to challenge that?
Yeah, I mean, the minimum wage, though, is an issue we absolutely have to address. We do have the working poor in New Zealand right now. It's not possible to work a traditional 40-hour week and survive on the minimum wage anymore. This is about a wider issue. We have to address the massive wage gap that we have between just New Zealand and Australia. And the policy that Nikki was talking about, that is our wage policy is part of that. We've been very careful and mindful, though, of the impact on small businesses.
Okay.
And for most, not every small business pays minimum wage.
6,000 jobs will be lost as a result of that policy.
Thank you, panel. Moving on to our second issue tonight, the environment. If the Rena disaster has taught us anything, it is that we can't handle a small oil spill just outside the port of Tauranga. We wouldn't be able to cope with a deep-sea drilling accident at twice the depth of the Gulf of Mexico spill. Nikki, I put to you that your party couldn't mine on conservation land, so they are now trying to mine underwater. How could Green Party voters support National when your policy favours environmental damage for economic gain?
Well, firstly, let's look at the history of Labor on the environment. Massive.
Why don't we talk about you? Why don't we talk about you?
I'll be putting the boot into that.
No, but you asked the question, why would Green Party voters support us? Well, many Green Party voters say to me is that Labor's history of deforestation, no action on water, no action on e-waste, not significant progress in terms of the ETS. And where we're at is we have obviously implemented the ETS. We've done it in a way that's affordable for New Zealanders. We've seen an increase of 90% in renewable energy consents. We're spending $265 million on cleaning up our waterways.
Where are you on deep sea drilling? Where are you on deep sea drilling? Your party's for it?
Well, let's talk about the mining issue. So you obviously are aware that I opposed mining of on the conservation land in terms of Great Barrier Island. But secondly, if you look at the RENA situation, what happened after the Gulf of Mexico was there was an independent review, and what was very clear from that independent review was the gap was the EEZ legislation. And I'm very proud that we introduced that legislation with the support of the Green Party, but Labor opposed it. And I want to know, why did Labor oppose what is going to be the framework that will actually enable a discussion about what activity could possibly occur in the EEZ via an Environmental Protection Authority, which we've set up. And I don't understand why
I'm still not clear on deep sea drilling.
Well, I think there's two things. All that the EEZ legislations would enable is a consent process to happen. That doesn't mean anyone would be successful through that consent process.
Jacinda, under the decade of Labor, let's have a look at it. Environmental pollution increased dramatically and the dairy industry got to pollute at will. We expect National to be lax on their farmer mates when it comes to pollution, but Labor is just as beholden to them. Why would Green Party voters give Labor their electorate votes? Why would they?
Look, we do have to toughen up what we're doing in all of those areas. I absolutely agree. That's why you will see a stark difference between Labor and National on these issues. Let me be really clear. No deep sea oil drilling till we can be absolutely assured that we can meet the environmental. It functionally is, because we're saying we're not going to do it until we can be sure that
Labor are not saying no deep sea
Nikki,
drilling.
I'm trying to respond clearly that we are against deep sea oil drilling until we have environmental safeguards, and that is far more clear than anything you'll get out of National on this. Secondly,
we agree with
you. Please, on the ETS. Agriculture's got to come in. It's responsible for half of our emissions in New Zealand.
They've been let off the hook. They don't have to.
Well, under Labor, we're bringing it in because that's the environmentally sound thing to do. National has also staggered out when they bring in industry and energy. Again, it's a cop-out. We've got to act now.
Nikki,
thirdly, Bomber, on water policy, because this is really important. It is time for us to have a robust national policy statement. National gutted the statement. They left it up to district councils and they've given them 19 years to meet the standard, and we don't even have a decent national standard.
Well, Nikki,
it's gutless, they've got a bad record.
Our clean, green, 100% pure brand is increasingly important on a polluted planet and is the only way we can charge a premium for our agricultural products. John Key, on BBC's Hard Talk programme, was sternly challenged on his grasp of the science of pollution and climate change. Has the government, in your view, strengthened or weakened our clean green brand?
I think we've done a number of things to strengthen it, and I just want to cover a couple. Firstly, you've got to come back to record. Labor's record on water policy is appalling. Our rivers were absolutely polluted. We've put $265 million into cleaning up our rivers, but we've also brought in water metering regulations. That's hugely significant for this country. I also think if you look at what we've done in terms of the ETS, we're seeing 90% renewable energy consents up.
Agriculture let off the hook, though.
But no, well, what we're saying is that it will be brought in as long as our major allies also bring it in terms of trading partners. But can I also just make this point in terms of the environment? Look, on the issue of deep sea drilling, all Labor's basically said, first they said it was going to be a moratorium, then they backtracked significantly and said, oh, we'll do it when we think it's safe. Well, of course, any political party would say that. There's no way anyone's going to do anything unless they think it's safe, so I don't think they've said anything.
Okay, Jacinda, seeing as the environment is central to the Greens policy base, has Labor walked away from genuine advances in environmental protection and sustainability because it can no longer compete on the issue? Have you walked away from it?
No, not at all. I mean, it's always been part of, it's always been part of Labor's kaupapa, part of our values. You know, perhaps in the media soundbite, sustainability is always part of our rhetoric, but so is community, so is so many other things that we talk about.
Yes or no to deep sea drilling?
we've said no until we have the safeguards. And right now,
question to both of you.
Right now, they're not there.
Okay, question to both of you.
That's
If the government was serious about the environment, why has it already attacked Len Brown's Auckland vision to control urban sprawl and increase public transport? Come on.
Well, it's not correct that we've attacked it. What we've actually done is we've worked with him. We've come a significant way in terms of the intensification.
He doesn't feel that he's been worked with.
Let me finish. We've come a significant way in terms of the intensification of housing. Where we're at is the Auckland plan is out for consultation, but what the Mayor has done is he said, look, 75% of the dwellings, I think there's about 400,000 dwellings, will be, he believes could be done within the current existing limits, and then 25% outside.
Your property developer mates don't like that.
All we're saying is show us the detail around that. Does that mean high-level high-rises in Greyland? Because that matters to the people of Greyland. And all we're saying is we just need to get to that detail. But in terms of public transport, $1 billion in electrification of rail, $340 million in terms of reducing
only
congestion.
What we deserve after the decades of underfunding.
But decades of underfunding, you're absolutely right. But I also would say there's a $10 billion funding gap. I'm personally supportive of the Central City Rail Link and a tram loop around the city, but we've got to get to the detail as to who's going to pay for what, and that's what we're doing.
If the government cared, why don't they love Len more?
Yeah, I mean,
it's because the candidate didn't win, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there are some massive differences between where the Auckland Council and where Len's vision is and where central government's vision is, and that I think is becoming more and more obvious as we get into the detail. But I do think public transport is the biggest illustration of that, because Len has said the most transformative project for us is the City Rail Link. The government has said it's not going to happen under any time soon, but it won't happen unless central government comes in.
Quick final question on environment. Could a National Green Party government function better than a Labour Green government? Your thoughts?
Look, we've shown over the last 3 years that we can significantly work with the Green Party. 100,000 houses insulated. We've cleaned up the mines. We've also worked with them on the National Cycleway. I actually personally hope that we can work with them more if we're re-elected, and I think there's a real opportunity, particularly in the marine space, to be able to work with them.
Greens are flirting with the National Party. They're not flirting with Labour.
For me, Bomber, it's a really simple answer. No, because they fundamentally believe in different things.
But they're flirting.
Why else would a Green MP say, over my dead body?
But not only one of them came out and said that. The others didn't.
Well,
the others can work with National.
Look, my absolute hope is that we have a Labour Green coalition.
We're going to move on. We're going to run out of time. Thank you, panel. Moving on to our third issue tonight, foreign affairs. The government has favoured alliances over an independent foreign policy. That clunking sound is David Lange rolling in his grave. What are the ramifications for New Zealand in giving up our independence in favour of America and our allies? Nikki, we are currently propping up a corrupt narco state while handing civilians over to known torture units. Our so-called rebuilding work has been little more than puff piece propaganda by the Defence Force, who admitted for the first time this year that we aren't mentoring and are in fact in an active combat role. Will the first promise broken under a national party be to remain in Afghanistan?
Well, firstly, I disagree with a number of things that you've just said. I've actually met a number of SAS troops, and I've had the discussion about the work that they do in Afghanistan. We have been significant. I want to say two things. We're very clear. Our role is to support the crisis response unit and to help them protect their nation. It is also true that we have seen young women go from being stuck inside their homes to actually attending school. We have seen some good things happen in that country.
It's a war for feminism, is it?
No. The goal is to ensure that we have a much more safer and secure Afghanistan, but it's also about global security, because, and let's just make it clear as well, there's 48 nations that are in there supporting the reconstruction of Afghanistan and ensuring that we support the Afghan government to build their defence.
The corrupt Afghan government. Jacinda, how do we win hearts and minds in Afghanistan when we're handing over civilians to known torture units? What does winning look like? And did the Armed Forces of New Zealand lie to the Labour government when they were in power about our real level of military involvement?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's impossible for a separate force like the SAS to win hearts and minds if the government isn't able and beginning to win hearts and minds. And what became really clear to us in 2005 was, when we looked at the next SAS deployment, was, the government wasn't winning hearts and minds. It was increasingly becoming corrupt. What had been a very different war was now turning into a local civilian-based conflict. We didn't believe that we could make the kind of contribution we wanted to make in that war anymore.
Did the military lie to Labour?
We are now committed I wasn't part of those briefings, Bomber, but we are now, I think the important point now is that we are committed to removing SAS troops from Afghanistan within 90 days of being...
2 weeks earlier than National.
That is when the next deployment's up. But look, we took them out in 2005. National put them back in 2009. We are very different on this issue.
No, we're not actually, because
you put them back, Nikki.
The argument,
it's a clear difference.
Here's the question for Labor. You're arguing that you're going to bring the SAS effectively back 2 weeks earlier. You're saying you're going to keep the Provincial Reconstruction Team there. They are, as Nikki Hager said, they are military armed service people. What is the difference between pulling the SAS and not pulling the PRT if you're saying that they're supporting a corrupt government?
The PRT are doing a provincial reconstruction work. They're building schools.
Yeah, but the work's not very good. You've seen the independent review of that.
But the difference is, and we've also said that they're up for review in 2014, and at that point we've got to look really clearly at that. But the difference with the PRT is the Provincial Reconstruction Team are working in a province where there's a good relationship locally where they are.
If your position was as moral as you're suggesting and as ethical, why not pull them all out? You know this is a joke.
And we
Afghanistan's
are, and
a
in
joke.
2014 we are at the time.
Okay, I've got to move on. Nikki, the free trade agreement with America that John Key wants to sign without much scrutiny will empower American pharmaceutical companies to attack Pharmac. Is National's free market ideology trumping our national economic sovereignty?
No, we've been very clear. Pharmac is a bottom line for us. We are not changing our Pharmac model.
Not according to Jane Kelsey and the work that she's been doing.
Well, that's incorrect. We have a proud history in this country of having bottom lines and free trade deals, and we're not changing the Pharmac model.
Jacinda, Labor opened the free trade floodgates with China and astoundingly included immigration into that free trade agreement. What is Labor not prepared to flog off to China as they increasingly look to expand their sphere of influence into the South Pacific?
Look, can I come back to the Trans-Pacific really briefly, Bomber? Because there is something that, how do we know that Pharmac is not on the table? Because
we've been told it is.
There is no transparency around this process, and that is the frightening thing. I think with such a major deal, where so much is at stake, we deserve to know more about what's going on in these negotiations. And at the moment, our understanding is that Pharmac is at risk. And so show us it's not. Give us more detail.
And what about the Chinese free trade deal?
Chinese free trade deal, we already had lifted our trade barriers. I mean, functionally, New Zealand was very much more an open market. Our net benefit came for New Zealand in that deal, and we've brought in billions as a consequence. What I would say, we've got to do more to monetize our free trade deals from a New Zealand perspective, more to support our small businesses and
Final question to both of you on this, on Foreign Affairs. Why are we reforming the Army, Navy and Air Force away from a peacekeeping role into a clip-on amphibious attack unit? Who are we going to attack and who are we going to clip onto?
Well, firstly, I disagree with that statement. If you look at the 2010 capability review, there is always going to be a strong role for New Zealand in terms of peacekeeping. But there are other more specialist roles as well that we think we can offer other countries in terms of conflicts around the world. And I think we've shown that whether it's through East Timor or whether it's through our SAS troops in terms of their support role with Afghanistan.
Who are we going to clip onto? This is a clip-on force.
Yeah, I mean, that's why our armed forces have to be independent. We can't go into conflicts just because we got asked. Maintaining our independence is the thing that I'm most proud of when it comes to foreign affairs and our military deployments.
Thank you, panel. We have to conclude tonight's debate with each of your final word. Nikki Kay, you have 1 minute to argue why the country will be better under National Party leadership. Your time starts now.
The last 3 years have been very tough. We've had some devastating events happen with the Canterbury earthquakes, the Pike River mine disaster, but also a major global financial crisis. I'm confident we've put in significant economic reform through the reform of our tax system, billions of dollars in infrastructure investment in broadband and schools. We've also been very conscious of the vulnerable people throughout this situation. We've invested $50 million in social housing, $50 million for first-time mums. We've invested significantly in Auckland, $1 billion in the electrification of rail, and the Victoria Park Tunnel, $340 million. But I'm also confident that we have a very strong leader in John Key. I'm confident that he is a good economic manager, and he has led New Zealand through some very tough times, and if given the chance, he will be a strong economic manager and a good person to lead our country for the next 3 years.
Thank you, Nikki. Jacinda Ardern, you have 1 minute to argue why the country will be better under Labour Party leadership. Your time starts now.
I think I could banter around a range of figures right now, but my simple question for viewers would be, does life feel better in New Zealand right now? We are at a crossroads this election. We have some major decisions to make. We can choose to get ourselves out of debt by selling off our assets and leaving ourselves in an economic hole, or we can re-gear our entire economy to the productive sector by bringing in a capital gains tax. We can choose to either continue down the path of environmental degradation by investing billions in roads, or we can boost and beef up our ETS scheme and invest in incredibly important projects like the City Rail Link. We can continue to see the major growth between the rich and poor in New Zealand, or we can start investing in the most vulnerable, and by that it has to be our kids and our next generation. This is a crossroads election. I'm hoping that you'll stand by the party that's standing up for Auckland and up for New Zealand.
Thank you, Jacinda. Thank you, Nikki. I'd like to remind viewers I will be hosting the I Predict Election 2011 show weeknights at 7 p.m. on Stratos from next week until the election. Follow me on my Citizen Bomber Twitter and Facebook sites. Citizen A is back next week with David Slack and Chris Trotter. Until then, good night, New Zealand. Good luck to the Auckland Central candidates, and thanks for watching.
Thank you.